Welcome back to the State and Local Sports Show here with Mark Tennis, co-founder and editor of CalHighSports.com. The news this week, Chavez High has hired Lateef Grimm as its football coach. Kind of a throwback to one of your earlier columns talking about Stockton, known as Whiteout City. That's probably been the most prolific position in terms of guys who have gone on to thrive in college and the pros. And that was certainly Lateef Grimm. He was a record-setting wide receiver, at least at the time, at Pitt. He kind of stands out as well as guys like J.D. Hill from Edison, Webster Slaughter, also Franklin, not to mention currently Brandon Cooks of Lincoln in New Orleans. When you hear this hire, what's your first impression?
I like it a lot. I mean, I remember Coach Grimm when he was at Brookside Christian a few seasons ago, and they were a lot of fun to watch. I mean, they had the quarterback Tony Rodriguez threw for 9 touchdowns in one game, and they got to a state bowl game. They didn't win that state bowl game, but that was still a very fun team to watch offensively. They had some good players on defense. They played with a lot of heart and passion, and looking forward to seeing if he can bring some of that to Chavez.
Now, he's the type of coach who, if you lag for a second, physically or mentally, he'll get in your face. And I'm kind of a fan of this, not necessarily that you have to do that, but just, culture seems it's become so sensitive now where there's a bit of coddling. I feel like as long as coaches kind of keep their profanity little to none or moderate and aren't over the line where they're abusive, I think it's good for, teenage kids. Sometimes they need that. From your standpoint, not just as a sports reporter, but someone who's a parent yourself, how do you feel about that coaching style that's really kind of intense and right in the faces of someone who's a son to the parents in the stands?
Yeah, obviously there's a line that's kind of there between the coaches and the kids and the parents, and it's hard to know where the line gets drawn, where a coach maybe goes over the line and maybe gets a little too loud, a little too abrasive. But it's hard to know where that is. I think it depends on the coach and what kind of a pedigree he has, what kind of respect, what kind of a resume that he's had, or she in some cases, in some sports. But I think I'm a little bit more on your siding with you that sometimes the line is a little too sensitive, and coaches should be allowed to coach and get a little loud and get crazy once in a while.
I remember Mike Montgomery when he was the coach of Cal men's basketball, and Alan Crabb, who just signed a huge extension with the Trailblazers, was on the team. At one point, Crabb was just kind of lagging, and Montgomery was in his face, and he shoved him, not shoved to hurt him, but just barely kind of touched his hands on his shoulders a little bit, and everyone flipped out about it. But you know what? Crabb played a lot better after that, and it's like he's not trying to hurt. He's not pulling a Bobby Knight. He's just kind of, it's almost just like a sharper version of a pat on the back, like, let's go, And it's just, I think it's just the age we live in.
Yep.
Looking more at football, you talk about talking to Lateef Grimm yesterday. He mentioned how he really wants to elevate Chavez to be one of those better programs in the area and the section. He even used, not that he was saying they're going to be there anytime soon, but he mentioned you have to play and beat teams like Folsom to get there. When you look at a city like Stockton, a city that has additions of Weston Ranch, McNair, and Chavez, all new high schools in the past 13 years, even Bear Creek in the 90s, it's not only diluted Stockton schools' athletic talent like mainstays like Franklin, Edison, and Stagg, but it's spread apart, the Lodi Unified too, with Tokay and Lodi. Is it possible for, schools in inner city areas, especially public schools, to be a Folsom, a Del Oro, Granite Bay, when those communities are so insulated and so set up for football and athletic success?
Yes, it's very possible, and the best example is Long Beach Unified down in Southern California, where you have Long Beach Poly, which is a large public urban high school. They have open enrollment, and that's really the key, is that kids from all over the city of Long Beach can go to Long Beach Poly for various different programs, and a lot of them are sports-related. And when you have that kind of open enrollment set up, it does enable a school to get really good and stay really good in a lot of sports. So it is possible, but it takes probably schools with even a bigger enrollment than the schools in Stockton have. You're talking about schools that have 3,000 kids, 3,500 kids, stuff like that, and none of the schools here are that big. But it is possible. It takes a lot, but it is possible.
You made a good example of probably the closest thing would be Grant up in Sacramento. They've been a large school section champion before a public school within the city of Sacramento. I mean, Coach Mike Alberghini up there has created his own dynasty, and he's such a beloved figure there that they've almost found their own insularity within that. But that didn't come from nowhere. But they're almost the exception, I think, as opposed to the rule.
Right. I think Grant. You look at Grant. It's in a community, Del Paso Heights, which is part of Sacramento, but Del Paso Heights as a community itself is very close and tight-knit, and a lot of the people in that community, they affiliate themselves and associate themselves with Grant High School, and then, of course, Grant High football, Pacer Pride, and if you go to a game there, it's great with the drum corps is awesome, and that is a place where, in the past, Edison maybe was a lot like Grant in the days when Charles Washington was there. And in fact, I'm pretty sure they used to play each other a lot. And there's a possibility that some of the Stockton schools like Chavez could get to the level of a Grant. But it would take a lot of work, and they need a coach to stay there a long time and cultivate it. It is possible, and Chavez is a nice campus, and it's a good place to go. And I'm sure I've never been to a game there, but I've been on the campus many times, and the kids have a good attitude, and we'll see what happens.
Talking about preseason football rankings in your weekly column. Mark does a column for us here at The Record and RecordNet.com. You talk about the Sac Joaquin section giving the nod of number one to Folsom, not just because they've been great last year, but they've been great over the span of 4 consecutive section championships. The interesting part, and you dive into this, is kind of finding the ones after that, number 2 and 3, looking at schools like St. Mary's and Del Oro. If you could kind of tease to what you were discussing this week.
Well, I do think that Folsom deserves to be the number one team in the Sac Joaquin section until they lose, and that's because they've earned that sort of designation by what they've done in the last 4 years. It's not based on returning starters and a lot of other stuff, but we know from their experience how good their coaching staff is. It's not going to matter that much how many guys are new or who's coming back and analyzing the returning starters and all that. It's more that the track record is just so impressive. They deserve to be in that position until they lose. And then if you look at it after that, who's number 2? And, Del Oro has a lot of fans out there because they have 7 3-year starters returning. They won a state championship last year. But in my opinion, I think St. Mary's has more compelling reasons to be number 2. Kind of get into that in the column. But a lot of reasons St. Mary's should be 2, and it's not just their players; it's the early season schedule that St. Mary's is playing. It's kind of funny. Del Oro has played a great schedule the last few years, but if you look at it this coming season, St. Mary's has a much tougher first few games than Del Oro does.
Everybody talks about the St. John Bosco game for St. Mary's. I look at week 0. They got to go to Sarah, the alma mater of Tom Brady, on a Saturday afternoon. I mean, just being on the road against a team like that, and that when you're not used to playing on a weekend in the day, I mean, that's brutal. I don't think that game is getting nearly enough attention.
No, it isn't, and it should. Sarah is a team that a lot of people like to be the best in the Central Coast section. They're coming off a year where they were on probation because of situation involving a game they refused to play, a consolation playoff game. So they were ineligible for the playoffs last season. Well, they believe they're eligible now, so they're going to be playing a little bit of vengeance, a little bit of chip on their shoulder. And they have a great coach, Patrick Walsh, who I've known since he was a kid. And he does a great job. And then you also keep in mind that Sarah, after they play St. Mary's, is going to play De La Salle. So if there's we're going to find out right away, where St. Mary's fits in the NorCal pecking order based on those first couple of games.
We also discussed Lincoln this week. They're playing Antioch in week 0 on August 26th. Najee Harris, the Alabama-bound running back, your Mr. Football of the Year last year, kind of the headliner there. Lincoln, looking back, doesn't really have a marquee win, you could say, since 2012, in my opinion, when they beat a Pleasant Grove team that eventually made the Division I section semifinals. And you think, though, just between their returning players, especially on offense, and the well-known nature of the Antioch game could give them a boost maybe in some preseason rankings.
It could, because you don't have anything to lose if you put Lincoln fairly high, because they're playing Antioch in their first game, and if they do well, then they've earned that position, and if they don't do well, then you move somebody else up where they were and drop them down a little bit. It's just, to me, you sort of plan your moves. You look at the early season schedule and you plan your moves ahead of time. That's how we do rankings at Cal High Sports. That's how we'll continue to do rankings, and that's why Lincoln's a little bit of an intriguing selection. I mean, not only where they have some good players returning, a new coach, Anthony Martinez, but they also have done very well in a lot of summer passing tournaments. That doesn't mean that much, but still, it shows that they're on the right track, and then they do have some good talent. And when you play a team like Antioch in your first game in that situation, you have an opportunity, even if you lose a close game, to turn a lot of heads.
CalHighSports.com is your epicenter for statewide football coverage this fall. Gold Club membership, all your insider content, feature stories, the record books, preseason rankings, less than $2 a month, less than $20 a year. I'd also like to say that the Record's Football Preview Tabloid magazine is returning for a second consecutive year. We're excited about that. That is due out on Wednesday, August 24th. Mark, thanks for joining us, and we're going to finally see some football here in 22 days from now.
Still got some time to go, though. Thanks.